In the mountains of ancient Japan, where mist clung to pine trees like whispered prayers, there lived a young monk named Kenji, whose mind raced faster than mountain streams after spring rain. Each night, as the temple bells marked the passage of time, Kenji would lie on his simple mat, eyes wide open, thoughts tumbling over one another like stones in an avalanche. He worried about his meditation practice, about whether he was worthy of the robes he wore, about tomorrow's tasks, about yesterday's mistakes, about the meaning of existence itself. The other monks slept peacefully around him, their breathing deep and rhythmic, while Kenji's mind constructed elaborate scenarios of failure and doubt. He imagined conversations that might never happen, rehearsed responses to criticisms that existed only in his imagination, and built towering monuments to his own inadequacy. The harder he tried to quiet his thoughts, the louder they became, like trying to silence a gong by striking it repeatedly. One particularly restless night, when the moon hung full and bright above the temple grounds, Kenji rose from his mat and wandered into the garden. The night air was cool against his skin, carrying the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of a stream. He found himself at the edge of a small pond, its surface perfectly still, reflecting the moon's silver light like a mirror made of liquid starlight. As he stood there, lost in his churning thoughts, an elderly monk appeared beside him, as silently as shadow. Master Tanaka was known throughout the temple for his profound wisdom and his ability to appear exactly when needed, as if summoned by the universe itself. His presence was like a calm harbor in the storm of Kenji's mind. "The pond is beautiful tonight," Master Tanaka observed, his voice soft as falling leaves. Kenji nodded, though his attention was still caught in the web of his own thinking. "Tell me, young one, what do you see when you look at the water?" Kenji studied the pond's surface, trying to give the answer he thought his master wanted to hear. "I see the reflection of the moon, master. I see the stars scattered across the water like diamonds on black silk. I see the perfect stillness that I wish I could find in my own mind." Master Tanaka smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling with gentle amusement. "Look more carefully," he suggested. "What creates this beautiful reflection?" Kenji looked again, this time with greater attention. The moon's image wavered slightly as a gentle breeze touched the water's surface. "The stillness creates the reflection," he said slowly. "When the water is calm, it can mirror the sky perfectly. And when the water moves," Master Tanaka asked, picking up a small pebble from the garden path, "the reflection becomes broken, fragmented," Kenji replied, understanding beginning to dawn in his mind like the first light of sunrise. Master Tanaka tossed the pebble into the center of the pond. Ripples spread outward in perfect concentric circles, and the moon's reflection shattered into 1,000 dancing fragments of light. The two monks watched in silence as the ripples gradually subsided, and slowly, inevitably, the moon's image reformed, whole and perfect once again. "Your mind is like this pond," Master Tanaka said gently. "When thoughts arise like ripples, the clear reflection of your true nature becomes disturbed. But notice something important. The moon itself never changes. Whether the water is still or moving, whether the reflection is clear or broken, the moon remains constant in the sky above." Kenji felt something shift inside him, like a door opening in a room he hadn't known existed. "You mean that my true nature, like the moon, remains unchanged regardless of the thoughts that disturb the surface of my mind?" "Exactly," Master Tanaka nodded. "The thoughts that keep you awake at night are like these ripples. They seem so important, so real, so urgent, but they are merely movements on the surface. Beneath them, your essential nature remains as peaceful and unchanging as the depths of this pond." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as the last of the ripples faded away. The moon's reflection returned to its perfect clarity, unmarked by the disturbance that had seemed so significant moments before. But Master Kenji asked, "How do I stop the ripples? How do I prevent thoughts from arising?" Master Tanaka chuckled softly, the sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "You don't stop them, young one. That would be like trying to prevent the wind from blowing or the seasons from changing. Instead, you learn to see them for what they truly are, temporary disturbances on the surface of something much deeper and more stable." He gestured toward the pond where a nightbird had landed and was drinking delicately from the edge. Each sip created tiny ripples, but the bird paid them no attention, focused only on quenching its thirst. See how the bird doesn't concern itself with the ripples it creates. It drinks what it needs and moves on. Your thoughts are the same. They arise, serve their purpose if they have one, and naturally subside if you don't feed them with your attention. Kenji watched the bird finish drinking and fly away into the darkness, leaving the pond to return once again to stillness. So when I lie awake at night, caught in my thinking, I should remember the pond. Remember that you are not the ripples, Master Tanaka corrected gently. You are the pond itself, vast, deep, and fundamentally peaceful. The ripples of thought may dance across your surface, but they cannot touch your depths. When you remember this, sleep comes naturally, like the moon's reflection returning to still water. As if to demonstrate his point, Master Tanaka picked up another pebble and tossed it into the pond. This time, instead of watching the ripples with concern, Kenji found himself observing with detached curiosity. The ripples spread, danced, and faded, but the essential nature of the pond remained unchanged. He felt a deep sense of peace settling over him like a warm blanket. The secret, Master Tanaka continued, is not to fight the ripples, but to rest in the awareness that observes them. This awareness is like the sky that holds both the moon and the clouds unchanged by either. When you lie down tonight, instead of trying to stop your thoughts, simply rest in the knowing that you are the vast space in which thoughts arise and pass away. Kenji bowed deeply to his teacher, feeling a profound gratitude that seemed to emanate from the very core of his being. As they walked back toward the temple, the young monk noticed that his mind had indeed grown quiet, not through force or effort, but through understanding. The thoughts that had seemed so urgent and important just an hour before now appeared as insubstantial as moonbeams on water. That night, as Kenji lay on his mat, he felt the familiar stirring of mental activity beginning to arise. But instead of engaging with the thoughts or fighting against them, he remembered the pond. He imagined himself as the still deep water, and his thoughts as gentle ripples on the surface. Each time his mind began to construct a story or worry about tomorrow, he would return to this image, resting in the awareness that observed all mental activity without being disturbed by it. Gradually, like ripples naturally subsiding on still water, his thoughts grew quieter and more spacious. Sleep came not as something he had to achieve or earn, but as a natural settling, like sediment sinking to the bottom of a clear mountain lake. In his dreams that night, Kenji found himself floating peacefully on the surface of an infinite pond, surrounded by stars held by the gentle embrace of the universe itself. In a small village nestled between rolling hills and ancient forests, there lived a weaver named Sato, whose fingers could create the most exquisite tapestries from the simplest threads. By day, her hands moved with practiced grace across the loom, creating patterns of breathtaking beauty that seemed to capture the very essence of nature itself. But when night fell and the village grew quiet, Sato's mind became a different kind of loom, weaving endless patterns of worry and regret that kept sleep at bay, like a vigilant guardian refusing entry to a sacred temple. She would lie in her small room above the weaving shop, listening to the gentle creaking of the wooden beams and the distant sound of night insects, while her thoughts spun themselves into increasingly complex knots. She worried about the commission she had accepted from the wealthy merchant in the neighboring town, wondering if her skills were adequate for such an important piece. She replayed conversations from the day, analyzing every word, every gesture, searching for hidden meanings and potential offenses she might have inadvertently caused. Her mind would leap from one concern to another like a restless monkey swinging through trees, never settling, never finding peace. She thought about her aging parents in the distant mountains, about the rising cost of silk thread, about whether her work truly had meaning in the grand tapestry of existence. Each thought seemed to spawn three more, until her mental landscape resembled a tangled web of silk threads that had been dropped and scattered by careless hands. One evening, as autumn painted the leaves in shades of gold and crimson, Sato found herself particularly tormented by a mistake she had made in her latest piece. A single thread had been woven incorrectly, creating a small imperfection in what should have been a perfect pattern. Though no one else would likely notice such a minor flaw to Sato, it seemed to glow like a beacon of her inadequacy, proof that she was not the master weaver she pretended to be. Unable to bear the weight of her churning thoughts any longer, she rose from her bed and made her way downstairs to her workshop. The familiar scent of wool and silk greeted her like an old friend, and moonlight streamed through the windows, casting silver patterns across her loom. She lit a single candle and sat before her work, staring at the tiny imperfection that had grown so large in her mind. As she sat there, lost in self-recrimination, she became aware of a presence in the doorway. An elderly woman stood there, her silver hair gleaming in the candlelight, her eyes holding the depth of countless seasons. Sato had never seen her before yet. Something about her seemed familiar, as if she were a character from a half-remembered dream. "Beautiful work," the woman said, her voice carrying the gentle authority of wind through ancient trees. She moved closer to examine the tapestry, her weathered hands hovering just above the fabric, as if she could feel its essence without touching. "Tell me, child, what do you see when you look at this piece?" Sato's cheeks burned with shame as she pointed to the imperfect thread. "I see my failure," she whispered. "I see proof that I am not skilled enough, not careful enough, not worthy of the trust people place in me. This single mistake ruins everything I have worked so hard to create." The old woman studied the tapestry for a long moment, then smiled with the warmth of sunrise breaking over mountain peaks. "How interesting," she mused. "I see something quite different. May I show you?" Without waiting for an answer, she moved to a different angle, gesturing for Sato to join her. "Look at your work from here, child. What do you see now?" Sato reluctantly shifted her position, expecting to see the flaw even more clearly from this new perspective. Instead, she gasped in surprise. From this angle, the supposedly imperfect thread seemed to catch the light in a unique way, creating a subtle highlight that actually enhanced the overall pattern. What she had seen as a mistake now appeared as an intentional design element that added depth and character to the piece. But it's wrong," Sato stammered, confusion clouding her features like morning mist. "The pattern calls for the thread to go in the opposite direction." The old woman nodded thoughtfully. "And yet, see how this mistake creates a small pool of light that draws the eye and adds movement to what might otherwise be a static design. Sometimes what we perceive as imperfection is actually the universe's way of adding uniqueness and beauty to our creations." She moved to another part of the tapestry, pointing to an area where the weave was absolutely perfect according to the original pattern. "This section is technically flawless," she observed. "Every thread is exactly where it should be, every color precisely as planned. It is beautiful in its perfection. But tell me which area captures your attention more, this perfect section or the area with your so-called mistake?" Sato looked back and forth between the two areas, and to her amazement, she found her gaze repeatedly drawn to the imperfect section. There was something alive about it, something that spoke to her in a way the perfect area did not. "The mistake," she admitted quietly. "But I don't understand why." "Because perfection, while admirable, can sometimes lack the spark of life that comes from spontaneity and unexpected variation," the old woman explained. "In nature, no two leaves are identical, no two snowflakes exactly alike. This variation is not a flaw in nature's design. It is what makes each element unique and precious." She gestured towards the window where moonlight illuminated the garden beyond. "Look at how the moon's light falls across your garden. Is it perfectly even? Does it illuminate every leaf and flower with identical intensity?" Sato looked out and saw how the moonlight created a landscape of light and shadow, highlighting some areas while leaving others in gentle darkness. The interplay between illuminated and shadowed spaces created a scene of breathtaking beauty that would have been impossible if the light had been perfectly uniform. "Your mind at night is like a weaver who has forgotten how to appreciate the natural variations in her work," the old woman continued. "You lie awake examining every thought, every memory, every concern, searching for flaws and imperfections. But just as this tapestry is beautiful, not despite its variations, but because of them, your life is rich and meaningful, not because it is perfect, but because it contains the full spectrum of human experience." Sato felt tears gathering in her eyes as understanding began to dawn like the first light of morning. "You mean that my worries, my mistakes, my imperfections, They're not flaws to be eliminated. They are threads in the tapestry of your existence, the old woman replied gently. Some threads are bright and joyful, others dark and challenging. Some follow the expected pattern, others veer in unexpected directions. But all of them together create the unique masterpiece that is your life. When you lie awake at night, caught in worry and self-judgment, you are like a weaver who can see only individual threads instead of the magnificent pattern they create together. The old woman moved closer to the loom, her fingers tracing the air above the fabric as if she were reading its story. The secret to peaceful sleep is learning to step back and see the larger pattern. Your worries about tomorrow, your regrets about yesterday, your fears about not being good enough. These are all just individual threads. Alone, they may seem problematic or out of place. But when viewed as part of the greater tapestry of your life, they each serve a purpose in creating something beautiful and unique. Sato looked at her work with new eyes, seeing not just the individual threads, but the way they work together to create something greater than the sum of their parts. Even the thread she had considered a mistake now seemed to have its place in the overall design, adding character and interest that a perfectly executed pattern might have lacked. But how do I remember this when I'm lying in bed overwhelmed by thoughts? Sato asked. How do I step back and see the larger pattern when I'm caught up in the details of my worries? The old woman smiled and moved to the window where she stood silhouetted against the moonlit night. When you lie down to sleep, imagine that you are stepping back from the loom of your life. See yourself moving farther and farther away until the individual threads of your daily concerns become too small to distinguish. From this distance, you can see the beautiful pattern that your life is weaving with all its variations and unexpected elements contributing to a design of remarkable beauty. She turned back to Sato, her eyes twinkling with ancient wisdom. Remember that you are both the weaver and the tapestry, both the artist and the art. The thoughts that keep you awake are simply the sound of the loom working, creating the next section of your life's pattern. You don't need to control every thread or worry about every small variation. Trust in the larger design that is unfolding through you. As she spoke these words, the old woman seemed to fade like morning mist, leaving Sato alone with her tapestry and a profound sense of peace. She looked once more at the thread she had considered a mistake, and now she could see it clearly as part of a larger pattern that was more beautiful for its imperfection. That night, when Sato returned to her bed, she carried with her a new understanding. As thoughts arose about her work, her relationships, her future, she imagined herself stepping back from the loom of her life, seeing each concern as simply another thread in a tapestry of infinite beauty and complexity. Instead of examining each thread for flaws, she rested in the knowing that all of them together were creating something magnificent and unique. Sleep came to her like the gentle settling of threads into their proper place in the weave, natural and effortless. In her dreams, she found herself floating above an enormous tapestry that stretched to the horizon in all directions, its patterns shifting and changing like living art, beautiful beyond description in its perfect imperfection. High in the mountains, where clouds gathered like thoughts in a restless mind, there stood an ancient monastery where monks had practiced the art of inner stillness for over 1,000 years. Among them lived a young monk named Hiroshi, whose gift for calligraphy was matched only by his talent for worry. Each brushstroke he created during the day was a masterpiece of flowing grace, but each night brought a torrent of mental activity that made sleep as elusive as morning mist. Hiroshi's calligraphy was renowned throughout the region for its perfect balance of strength and delicacy. Visitors would travel for days just to see his work, marveling at how each character seemed to dance across the rice paper with the fluid motion of water flowing over stones. Yet despite this recognition, or perhaps because of it, Hiroshi found himself trapped in an endless cycle of self-doubt and perfectionist thinking that transformed his nights into battlegrounds of the mind. As darkness fell each evening, Hiroshi would lie on his simple sleeping mat, his mind immediately beginning its familiar ritual of examination and judgment. He would replay every brushstroke from the day, analyzing each character for flaws that only he could perceive. Had the curve of that particular stroke been too bold? Was the spacing between characters perfectly balanced? Did his work truly deserve the praise it received? Or were people simply being polite, These questions would multiply like ripples in a disturbed pond, each one spawning countless others until his mind resembled a chaotic storm of black ink spilled across white paper. He worried about commissions he had yet to receive, about whether his skills would deteriorate with age, about the meaning and purpose of his artistic practice. The harder he tried to quiet these thoughts, the more insistent they became, like trying to smooth wrinkles from silk by pressing harder with increasingly frantic hands. One particularly restless night, when the autumn wind howled through the mountain passes like the voice of his own anxiety, Hiroshi abandoned his futile attempts at sleep and made his way to the monastery's main hall. The space was vast and dimly lit by a single oil lamp, its flame casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls lined with centuries of calligraphic masterpieces. The air held the familiar scent of ink and incense, usually comforting, but tonight seeming to mock his inability to find peace. He knelt before his writing desk, hoping that perhaps the physical act of practicing his art might calm his turbulent mind. He prepared his inkstone with methodical precision, grinding the ink stick in slow, meditative circles while trying to focus on the simple, repetitive motion. The familiar ritual usually brought him peace, but tonight, even this sacred practice felt contaminated by his restless energy. As he lifted his brush to begin writing, a soft voice spoke from the shadows behind him. The mind that creates beauty by day struggles to find rest by night. Hiroshi turned to see Master Yamamoto, the monastery's eldest teacher, emerging from the darkness like a figure materializing from a dream. His presence was so quiet and unassuming that he seemed to be made of the same silence that filled the hall. "Master." Hiroshi bowed respectfully, though his embarrassment at being discovered in his midnight struggle colored his cheeks. "I could not sleep. I thought perhaps practicing might help quiet my thoughts." Master Yamamoto approached slowly, his footsteps making no sound on the polished wooden floor. He was ancient beyond measure, his face lined with the wisdom of countless seasons, yet his eyes held the bright clarity of fresh mountain springs. "Show me what troubles you," he said, simply settling beside Hiroshi's writing desk with the fluid grace of falling leaves. Hiroshi hesitated, then dipped his brush in the prepared ink and began to write a simple character meaning peace. But as he formed the strokes, his hand trembled slightly with the weight of his expectations. The character that emerged was technically perfect, each line precisely where it should be. Yet somehow it felt lifeless, mechanical, devoid of the natural flow that characterized his best work. "I see," Master Yamamoto observed quietly. "Your brush carries the burden of your thinking mind. Each stroke is weighed down with judgment and expectation. Tell me, when you write during the day, what is different?" Hiroshi considered this question, his brow furrowing with concentration. "During the day, I am focused on the work itself. I lose myself in the flow of creation. But at night, I cannot stop analyzing and judging everything I do." Master Yamamoto nodded slowly, then reached for a brush of his own. "Watch," he said simply, and began to write the same character for peace. But his approach was entirely different. Instead of the careful, controlled movements that Hiroshi had used, the master's brush moved with spontaneous fluidity, as if the character were writing itself through him rather than being created by conscious effort. The resulting character was breathtaking in its natural grace. Each stroke flowed into the next with organic rhythm, creating a sense of movement and life that seemed to pulse with its own energy. Yet when Hiroshi looked more closely, he could see that technically the character was less perfect than his own. Some strokes were slightly thicker than traditional proportions called for, others curved in ways that deviated from classical forms. "Master," Hiroshi said hesitantly, "your character is beautiful, but it doesn't follow all the traditional rules." Master Yamamoto smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features like sunrise illuminating mountain peaks. "Exactly. And which character carries more life, yours that follows every rule perfectly, or mine that flows from a place beyond rules?" Hiroshi looked back and forth between the two characters and gradually began to understand. His own work, while technically flawless, felt rigid and constrained. The master's character, despite its technical imperfections, seemed to breathe with natural vitality. "Yours," he admitted quietly, "but I don't understand how you achieved that flow." "The secret," Master Yamamoto explained, "lies not in the technique of the brush, but in the state of the mind that guides it. When you write during the day, you enter what we call no mind, a state where the thinking, judging, analyzing mind steps aside and allows pure creative expression to flow through you. But at night, when you lie down to sleep, you try to force this same natural flow through the narrow channel of your worried thoughts. He gestured toward the characters they had written. Your nighttime mind is like trying to create calligraphy while constantly stopping to judge each stroke before moving to the next. The natural flow is interrupted by analysis, the organic rhythm broken by self-doubt. Sleep, like good calligraphy, requires the same quality of no mind, a letting go of control and a trust in the natural process. Master Yamamoto prepared fresh ink and handed Hiroshi a clean brush. "Try again," he suggested. "But this time, do not think about creating the perfect character. Instead, imagine that you are not writing at all. Imagine that the character wants to write itself, and you are simply the instrument through which it expresses its own nature." Hiroshi took the brush with trembling hands, trying to understand what his teacher meant. How could he not think about what he was doing? How could he write without conscious intention? But as he held the brush poised above the paper, something in Master Yamamoto's presence seemed to quiet the chattering voice in his mind. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the brush in his hand, sensing the potential energy contained in the prepared ink. Then, without conscious planning, he allowed his hand to move. The brush touched the paper and began to flow, creating strokes that seemed to emerge from some deeper source than his thinking mind. When he opened his eyes, he gasped in amazement. The character he had created was unlike anything he had ever written before. It possessed a quality of spontaneous grace that rivaled his master's work, each stroke flowing naturally into the next, as if the entire character had been born in a single moment of creative expression. "How did I do that?" he whispered, staring at his creation in wonder. "You stopped trying to do it," Master Yamamoto replied with gentle amusement. "You allowed it to do itself through you. This is the same quality of mind that allows natural sleep to occur. When you lie down at night and try to force sleep through effort and control, you create the same kind of rigidity that made your first character lifeless. But when you learn to rest in the same no mind that creates beautiful calligraphy, sleep comes as naturally as ink flowing from brush to paper." The old master rose to his feet with fluid grace, preparing to return to his own quarters. "Remember this feeling," he advised. "When thoughts arise at night, do not try to stop them or control them. Instead, be like the brush that allows the character to write itself. Rest in the awareness that observes thoughts without being caught by them, and let sleep write itself through you." As Master Yamamoto disappeared back into the shadows, Hiroshi remained at his desk studying the character he had created in that moment of no mind. He could feel the difference between this natural expression and his usual controlled efforts, and gradually began to understand how the same principle might apply to sleep. That night, when he returned to his sleeping mat, Hiroshi carried with him a new understanding. As his familiar thoughts began to arise, worries about his work, judgments about his worthiness, concerns about tomorrow's challenges, he remembered the feeling of allowing the character to write itself. Instead of engaging with these thoughts or trying to push them away, he simply rested in the awareness that observed them like a brush held gently above paper, ready to respond to whatever wanted to express itself. Gradually, his thoughts began to flow with the same natural rhythm as his best calligraphy, arising and dissolving without effort or resistance. Sleep came not as something he achieved through technique or control, but as a natural expression of the same no mind that created his most beautiful art. In his dreams, he found himself writing characters of light across the darkness of space, each stroke a star, each word a constellation, all of it flowing with the effortless grace of the universe, expressing its own infinite creativity. In the heart of a bustling city where neon lights painted the night in electric colors and the sounds of traffic never truly ceased, there lived a clockmaker named Yuki, whose workshop was an island of mechanical precision in an ocean of digital chaos. Her small shop occupied the ground floor of an old building, its windows filled with timepieces of every description. Grandfather clocks that chimed the hours with deep, resonant voices, delicate pocket watches that ticked with the rhythm of hummingbird hearts, and ornate mantel clocks, whose pendulums swung with hypnotic regularity. By day, Yuki's hands moved with the practiced precision of someone who understood that time itself could be captured, measured, and given physical form through gears and springs and carefully calibrated mechanisms. She could diagnose the ailment of a sick timepiece with the skill of a physician, knowing exactly which gear needed adjustment or which spring required replacement to restore the smooth flow of measured moments. Her reputation for excellence had spread throughout the city, drawing customers who valued the ancient art of mechanical timekeeping in an age of atomic accuracy and digital displays. But when the last customer departed and she locked the door of her shop, Yuki found herself trapped in a different relationship with time altogether. The very clocks that brought her such satisfaction during working hours seemed to mock her at night, their collective ticking creating a symphony of temporal awareness that made sleep impossible. Each tick reminded her of a moment passing, each chime marked another hour lost to insomnia, and the steady progression of mechanical time seemed to accelerate her anxiety rather than soothe it. She would lie in her small apartment above the shop, surrounded by the gentle sounds of dozens of timepieces, marking their eternal rhythm, while her mind raced ahead into future scenarios or circled back to revisit past decisions. The irony was not lost on her. She, who could repair any clock, who understood the intricate mechanics of temporal measurement better than almost anyone alive, could not seem to regulate the chaotic timing of her own thoughts. Her mind would leap from one concern to another with no apparent pattern or logic, like a broken clock whose hands moved erratically rather than following their prescribed path. She worried about the declining interest in mechanical timepieces, about whether her skills would become obsolete in a world increasingly dominated by digital precision. She replayed conversations with customers, analyzing their words for signs of dissatisfaction or hints that they might take their business elsewhere. The thoughts seemed to multiply with each passing hour, creating an internal cacophony that drowned out the peaceful rhythm of her clocks. She would calculate how many hours of sleep she might still achieve if she fell asleep immediately, then recalculate as more time passed, creating a spiral of temporal anxiety that made rest even more elusive. The harder she tried to synchronize her mind with the steady rhythm of her timepieces, the more chaotic her thoughts became. One particularly sleepless night, when the city's distant hum seemed louder than usual and her thoughts more insistent than ever, Yuki rose from her bed and made her way downstairs to her workshop. The familiar space welcomed her with its scents of oil and metal polish, and the gentle chorus of ticking filled the air like a mechanical lullaby. She moved among her clocks, checking their faces in the dim light that filtered through the street-facing windows, finding comfort in their steady, predictable progression. As she stood before her most prized possession, an ancient grandfather clock that had been in her family for generations, she noticed something that made her pause. Despite the clock's perfect mechanical condition, its pendulum seemed to swing with a rhythm that was somehow different from the others. Not faster or slower, but with a quality of movement that seemed more organic, more alive than the precise mechanical motion she was accustomed to. Intrigued, she opened the clock's case to examine its mechanism more closely. Everything appeared to be in perfect order. The gears meshed smoothly, the escapement functioned flawlessly, the weights hung at their proper positions. Yet there was something about the pendulum's motion that seemed to transcend mere mechanical precision, as if it were responding to some deeper rhythm than the one dictated by its physical construction. As she watched, mesmerized by the pendulum's hypnotic swing, she became aware of a presence in the shop. An elderly man stood near the entrance, though she was certain she had locked the door securely. He was dressed in the simple clothes of a craftsman, his hands bearing the calluses and stains that spoke of a lifetime working with tools and machinery. His eyes held the patient wisdom of someone who had spent decades observing the subtle relationships between time, motion, and mechanical precision. "Beautiful clock," he observed, approaching with the careful gait of someone who understood the value of measured movement. "Your great-grandfather's work, if I'm not mistaken. He understood something about time that most clockmakers never discover." Yuki stared at him in amazement, both because of his unexpected presence and because of his knowledge of her family history. "How do you know about my great-grandfather? And how did you get into my shop?" The old man smiled, his weathered features creasing with gentle amusement. "Time has a way of opening doors that seem permanently closed," he replied cryptically. "As for your great-grandfather, I knew him well. We shared an understanding about the true nature of temporal flow that goes beyond mere mechanical measurement." He moved closer to the grandfather clock, his eyes following the pendulum's steady swing with the appreciation of a true connoisseur. "Tell me, what do you see when you watch this pendulum move?" Yuki studied the pendulum's motion, trying to articulate what made it seem different from her other timepieces. "It swings with perfect regularity," she said slowly. "Each arc is identical to the last, each timing precise to the fraction of a second. It's a masterpiece of mechanical engineering." The old man nodded approvingly, then asked, "And yet does it seem alive to you in a way that your other clocks do not?" Yuki looked more closely and gradually began to understand what he meant. While the pendulum's timing was indeed mechanically perfect, there was something about its movement that seemed to breathe, to pulse with a vitality that transcended its physical construction. "Yes," she admitted, "but I don't understand why. Mechanically, it's no different from any other well-made pendulum."
"Your great-grandfather discovered something that few clockmakers ever learn," the old man explained. "He understood that the most perfect timepieces are not those that impose rigid mechanical rhythm, but those that find harmony with the natural rhythms that already exist in the universe. This pendulum doesn't just mark time, it dances with it."
He gestured toward the other clocks in the shop, their various ticking sounds creating a complex polyrhythm that filled the space. "Listen to how all your clocks sound together. Do you hear discord or harmony?" Yuki listened more carefully than she ever had before, and to her surprise, she began to perceive an underlying pattern in what she had always thought was random mechanical noise. The various ticking sounds seemed to weave together into a complex but coherent rhythm, like a percussion ensemble, where each instrument played its part in creating a larger musical whole. "They're not fighting against each other," she realized with wonder. "They're creating a kind of temporal symphony." "Exactly," the old man confirmed. "Each clock maintains its own precise rhythm, yet somehow they all participate in a larger pattern that emerges naturally from their interaction. This is the secret your great-grandfather built into that pendulum, the ability to maintain perfect individual timing while remaining in harmony with the greater rhythms around it." He turned to face Yuki directly, his eyes reflecting the gentle light from the street lamps outside. "Your mind at night is like a clock that has fallen out of harmony with the natural rhythms of rest and wakefulness. You try to force your thoughts to follow a rigid schedule to tick along at the precise pace you think they should maintain. But thoughts, like time itself, have their own organic rhythm that cannot be controlled through mechanical force alone." Yuki felt a spark of understanding beginning to kindle in her mind. "You mean that instead of trying to make my thoughts follow a predetermined pattern, I should learn to let them find their natural rhythm? Think of it this way," the old man continued, moving to examine some of the other timepieces in the shop. "When you repair a clock, do you force the gears to move, or do you remove the obstacles that prevent their natural motion?" "I remove the obstacles," Yuki replied immediately. "Forcing mechanical parts only causes damage. The gears want to move smoothly. My job is to eliminate whatever is preventing that natural motion." "Your thoughts are the same," he explained. "They have their own natural rhythm of arising, developing, and dissolving. When you lie awake at night fighting against this rhythm, trying to force your mind to be still through effort and control, you create the very obstacles that prevent natural rest from occurring." He returned to the grandfather clock, placing his hand gently on its case, as if feeling for the vibrations of its internal mechanism. "Watch this pendulum again, but this time, don't focus on its mechanical precision. Instead, observe how it seems to breathe, how it finds its rhythm, not through rigid control, but through a kind of dynamic balance that responds to subtle changes in its environment." Yuki watched the pendulum with new eyes and gradually began to see what he meant. While the pendulum maintained its steady rhythm, she could perceive tiny variations in its motion, microscopic adjustments that allowed it to maintain perfect timing despite changes in temperature, humidity, and the countless other variables that affected its physical environment. "It's not rigidly mechanical at all," she breathed in amazement. "It's constantly making tiny adjustments, finding its balance moment by moment. This is the secret of natural sleep," the old man revealed. "Instead of trying to force your mind into rigid stillness, Learn to find the dynamic balance that allows thoughts to arise and pass away in their own rhythm. Like this pendulum, your awareness can maintain perfect stability while remaining flexible enough to respond to the natural fluctuations of mental activity. He began to move toward the door, his mission apparently complete. When you lie down tonight, remember the wisdom of your great-grandfather's clock. Don't try to stop the ticking of your thoughts, but listen for the deeper rhythm that underlies all mental activity. Rest in the awareness that observes thoughts the way this pendulum observes time, with perfect presence but without attachment to any particular moment. As he reached the door, he paused and turned back one final time. Time is not your enemy, young clockmaker. It is the medium through which life expresses itself. When you learn to dance with time instead of trying to control it, sleep comes as naturally as the swing of a perfectly balanced pendulum. With these words, he stepped out into the night, leaving Yuki alone with her clocks and a profound new understanding of the relationship between mechanical precision and organic rhythm. She stood before the grandfather clock for a long time, watching its pendulum swing with what she now recognized as a kind of temporal meditation, each arc a perfect balance between structure and spontaneity. That night, when she returned to her bed, Yuki carried with her the image of the pendulum, finding its perfect rhythm through dynamic balance rather than rigid control. As her familiar thoughts began to arise, she imagined her awareness as the stable center around which thoughts could swing like a pendulum, maintaining their natural rhythm without her needing to control or direct their movement. Sleep came to her like the settling of a perfectly tuned mechanism into its natural rhythm, effortless and inevitable. In her dreams, she found herself in a vast clockwork universe where every star was a gear, every planet a pendulum, all of them moving together in perfect harmony while maintaining their individual rhythms, creating a cosmic symphony of time that played the eternal song of existence itself. In a tranquil village surrounded by fields of golden rice and winding streams, there lived a gardener named Hana, whose hands coaxed life from the soil and whose heart longed for the same peace she cultivated in her garden. Each morning, Hana rose with the sun, tending to her plants with gentle care, pruning, watering and guiding delicate vines along bamboo trellises. Her garden was a tapestry of color and fragrance, a living testament to patience and devotion admired by all who passed through the village. Yet, as dusk fell and the world grew quiet, Hannah's mind became a tangled thicket of worries and unfinished thoughts. She would lie in her small room overlooking the moonlit garden, listening to the chorus of frogs and the soft rustle of leaves, while her thoughts grew wild and unruly. She worried about the coming harvest, about the health of her aging mother, about whether she had done enough for her neighbors, about the unpredictable weather, about the future she could not see. Her mind, so disciplined in the garden, seemed to rebel at night, sending up shoots of anxiety that grew faster than she could prune them. She replayed conversations, imagined disasters, and tried to plan for every possible outcome, only to find herself more entangled in her own thinking. The harder she tried to bring order to her thoughts, the more chaotic they became, like weeds flourishing in neglected soil. One evening, after a day of relentless summer heat, Hannah wandered into her garden seeking solace. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine, and fireflies drifted among the blossoms like floating lanterns. She knelt beside her favorite patch of wildflowers, their petals glowing softly in the moonlight, and let her hands rest in the cool earth. As she sat there, lost in her worries, she heard the sound of footsteps on the garden path. An old man appeared, his white hair shining in the moonlight, his movements as unhurried as the flow of the nearby stream. He carried a small rake over his shoulder and wore a robe the color of moss. "Still working so late, Hannah?" he asked, his voice as gentle as the evening breeze. She shook her head, embarrassed to be caught tending her garden at such an hour. "I couldn't sleep, Master Wren. My mind is too full of weeds tonight." He smiled and joined her among the flowers, settling onto a flat stone with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime close to the earth. "Tell me, what do you do when your garden becomes overgrown with weeds?" "I pull them out, of course," Hannah replied, "but sometimes it feels like no matter how many I remove, more appear the next day. It's endless." Master Wren nodded, his gaze sweeping over the moonlit beds. "And what happens if you try to pull all the weeds at once in a single night?" Hannah laughed softly. "I would exhaust myself and probably damage the plants I wish to protect." Exactly, he said. The garden teaches us that growth and disorder are natural companions. Weeds will always return just as flowers will always bloom. The secret is not to eradicate all disorder, but to tend the garden with patience, removing what you can, nurturing what you love, and accepting that some wildness will always remain. He reached down and gently pulled a small weed from the edge of the path, examining its delicate roots before setting it aside. Your mind is a garden, Hannah. At night, when you lie awake, you notice every weed, every worry, every regret, every unfinished task. You try to pull them all out at once, but this only leaves you tired and anxious. She listened, feeling the truth of his words settle over her like dew. But how do I rest when my mind is so full of weeds? Master Wren smiled, his eyes reflecting the starlight. When you tend your garden, do you focus only on the weeds, or do you also admire the beauty of the flowers, the strength of the trees, the promise of fruit yet to come? I try to see it all, Hannah admitted. Then do the same with your mind, he said. When worries arise, notice them gently as you would a weed among your roses. Acknowledge their presence, but do not let them overshadow the beauty that also grows within you. Your kindness, your gratitude, your moments of joy. Rest in the awareness that you are both gardener and garden capable of tending your thoughts with patience and compassion. He gestured to the wildflowers, their colors undiminished by the presence of a few stray weeds. Perfection is not the absence of weeds, but the harmony that arises when we accept both order and wildness. When you lie down tonight, imagine your mind as this garden, some parts neat and tended, others wild and free. Trust that with gentle attention, the flowers will always outgrow the weeds. As the old man rose and disappeared down the path, Hannah felt a deep calm settle within her. She lingered in the garden, breathing in the night air, feeling her worries soften and blend into the larger tapestry of her life. When she returned to her room, the chorus of frogs and the scent of jasmine lulled her towards sleep. Her mind no longer a battlefield, but a living garden tended with patience and love. In her dreams, Hannah wandered through endless fields of flowers, each one unique, each one thriving in its own way. And she understood that peace was not the absence of worry, but the gentle acceptance of all that grows within. In the shadow of a great forest where ancient trees whispered secrets to the wind, lived a woodcarver named Taro, whose art brought life to the heart of silent timber. Each day, Taro's hands shaped blocks of cedar and cypress into graceful cranes, gentle foxes, and wise old turtles, each carving imbued with a spirit that seemed to emerge from the wood itself. His workshop was filled with the scent of fresh shavings and the soft glow of lantern light, a haven of calm in a world that often rushed past without noticing the beauty in small things. But when night fell and the forest grew still, Taro's mind became a restless grove of shadows and echoes. He would lie awake listening to the distant hoot of an owl or the soft rustle of leaves while his thoughts replayed the day's work and worried over imperfections only he could see. He questioned the curve of a crane's neck, the smoothness of a turtle's shell, the balance of a fox's tail. He wondered if his art truly honored the spirit of the trees, or if he was simply imposing his own will upon nature. As the hours slipped by, his mind filled with regrets about wasted wood, doubts about tomorrow's commissions, and memories of harsh words spoken long ago. The more he tried to silence his thoughts, the more insistent they became, like wind stirring the branches of the tallest pines. One night, as a gentle rain tapped on the roof and the scent of wet earth drifted through the open window, Taro rose from his futon and wandered into his workshop. The familiar tools awaited him, their handles worn smooth by years of use, their edges sharp and ready. He sat before a fresh block of cedar, hoping that the act of carving might soothe his mind. As he traced the grain with his fingers, an old friend from the village, Master Jun, appeared in the doorway. Jun was a basket weaver, his own hands marked by the labor of bending reeds and willow branches into beautiful, useful forms. He entered quietly, carrying with him the calm presence of someone who had learned to listen deeply to the materials of his craft. Working late, Taro, Jun asked, settling onto a low stool nearby. Taro sighed, his shoulders heavy with fatigue.
I cannot sleep. My mind is full of unfinished carvings and mistakes I cannot fix.
Jun nodded his gaze, drifting to the rows of completed animals on the shelves. Tell me, when you begin a new carving, do you see the finished form in your mind, or do you discover it as you work? Taro considered the question. Sometimes I have a vision, but often the wood leads me. A knot or a curve will suggest a wing, a paw, a beak. I try to listen, but I worry that I am not always worthy of what the wood offers. June smiled, reaching for a small crane on the shelf. This one, did you plan its shape, or did it emerge as you carved? Taro remembered the day he had worked on that piece. It emerged. I thought I was making a heron, but the grain pulled me toward a crane. At first I resisted, but then I let go and followed what the wood wanted to become. And were you satisfied with the result? June asked. Taro looked at the crane, noticing the gentle arc of its neck and the sense of movement in its wings. Yes, it is one of my favorites, though it is not what I intended. June placed the crane back on the shelf. Our thoughts at night are like the grain in the wood. We try to control them, to force them into shapes we desire, but often they have their own patterns, their own stories to tell. The more we resist, the more tension we create. But when we listen, truly listen, we find that even our worries and doubts can carve something meaningful in the quiet hours. Taro listened, feeling the wisdom in his friend's words. But how do I listen without becoming lost in the noise of my own mind? Jun picked up a carving knife and handed it to Taro. When you carve, you do not attack the wood. You move slowly, feeling for the natural lines, adjusting your pressure with each pass. Do the same with your thoughts. When worries arise, greet them gently. Notice their shape, their texture, their direction. Let them show you what they wish to become, rather than forcing them into silence. He gestured to the shavings on the floor, each one a remnant of the carving process. Not every thought needs to be kept, just as not every shaving becomes part of the finished piece. Let the unnecessary fall away. Keep only what serves the deeper form of your life. Taro looked around his workshop, seeing it anew. The shelves were filled with animals that had emerged from the union of his skill and the wood's own nature. The floor was covered with shavings, evidence of all that had been released in the process. He realized that his sleepless nights were not failures, but opportunities to listen more deeply, to discover what his mind was trying to reveal. That night, when Taro returned to his futon, he brought with him the patience of the woodcarver and the humility of the listener. As thoughts arose, regrets, worries, memories, he greeted them gently, tracing their grain without judgment, letting them shape themselves, and then fall away when their purpose was served. Sleep came to him as softly as rain on cedar, and in his dreams, Taro wandered through a forest where every tree whispered a story, every shadow held a lesson, and every breath carried the promise of new forms waiting to be discovered. In a quiet mountain temple where the wind carried the scent of pine and ancient incense, there lived a tea master named Emi, whose ceremonies drew pilgrims from distant lands. Her hands moved with the grace of falling petals, each gesture measured and mindful, each movement a silent poem. The tea room was a sanctuary of simplicity. Tatami mats, a single scroll, a vase with one perfect camellia where time seemed to slow to the rhythm of breath and boiling water. By day, Emi's presence brought tranquility to all who entered. Her guests left lighter, their burdens set down with their shoes at the threshold. Yet when the lanterns were extinguished and the temple grew hushed, Emi's mind became a restless kettle bubbling with thoughts she could not pour away. She worried about the quality of her matcha, the subtlety of her bow, the fleeting expressions on her guests' faces. She replayed the day's ceremonies, searching for moments where her hand might have trembled or her words fallen short. Her mind, so disciplined in ritual, became wild and unruly in solitude. She wondered if her devotion to tea truly honored the spirit of her teachers, or if she was merely performing empty gestures. She questioned her path, her worthiness, the meaning of her practice in a world that rushed past the beauty of small things. One night, as rain tapped gently on the shoji screens and the temple bell marked the hour, Emi sat alone in the tea room, unable to sleep. The silence pressed in around her, amplifying every doubt, every unfinished thought. She lit a single candle, its flame flickering in the darkness, and began to prepare a bowl of tea for herself, seeking solace in the familiar ritual. As she whisked the matcha, an old nun entered the room, her steps so light they barely disturbed the tatami. Sister Kyo was known for her laughter and her wisdom, her eyes bright as mountain streams. She sat across from Emmy, folding her hands in her lap. "Tea for one tonight?" Kyo asked, her voice as gentle as the rain. Emmy bowed, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I could not sleep. My mind is too noisy." Kyo smiled, accepting the bowl Emmy offered. She sipped the tea, slowly savoring its warmth. "Tell me, child, why do you think we drink tea in silence?" Emmy considered the question. "To appreciate the taste, the fragrance, the moment. To honor the presence of our guests." Kyo nodded. "Yes, but also to listen to the water, to the wind, to our own hearts. Silence is not the absence of sound, but the space where we hear what is most important." She set the bowl down and looked at Emmy with kindness. "Your mind at night is like a tea room filled with too many guests. Each thought clamors for attention, each worry demands a seat at the table. But the true ceremony is not about entertaining every guest. It is about creating space for what is essential." Emmy listened, feeling her breath slow. "But how do I choose which thoughts to serve and which to let go?" Kyo gestured to the simple arrangement of the tea room. "When you prepare for a ceremony, do you fill the room with many flowers, many scrolls, many decorations?" "No," Emmy replied. "I choose one flower, one scroll, one bowl. I keep only what is needed for harmony." "Do the same with your thoughts," Kyo said. "When you lie awake, notice each thought as it enters your mind. Bow to it, acknowledge it, but do not invite it to stay if it does not serve the peace of your heart. Let your mind become a simple tea room, spacious, uncluttered, open to the beauty of the present moment." She poured another bowl of tea, her movements unhurried. "Perfection in tea is not the absence of mistakes, but the presence of attention. Perfection in sleep is not the absence of thoughts, but the presence of acceptance. When your mind becomes spacious, even noisy thoughts dissolve into the quiet, like steam rising from a hot bowl." As the candle burned lower, Emmy felt her worries settle, each one acknowledged and gently released. The room grew still, the rain softened, and her heart opened to the silence that held everything: doubt, gratitude, longing, peace. That night, as Emmy lay down to rest, she imagined her mind as a quiet tea room. She greeted each thought with a bow, thanked it for coming, and let it leave when its purpose was served. Sleep came to her like a guest welcomed with grace, and in her dreams she served tea to the moon and stars, the universe itself, a single perfect bowl. In the heart of a misty valley where streams traced silver paths through moss-covered stones, there lived a potter named Daichi, whose hands shaped earth and water into vessels of quiet beauty. His kiln stood at the edge of the village, its chimney breathing gentle smoke into the dawn, and his shelves were lined with bowls, cups and vases, each one unique, each one bearing the subtle marks of fire and time. By day, Daichi worked in silence, listening to the song of the wheel and the whisper of clay beneath his fingers. He found peace in the slow turning, in the yielding of earth to his touch, in the dance between form and emptiness. Yet when night fell and the world grew still, Daichi's mind became a spinning wheel of restless thoughts. He worried about cracks that might appear in the firing, about glazes that might run, or colors that might fade. He questioned the worth of his creations, wondering if they brought beauty or merely cluttered the world. His mind circled back to old mistakes: a kiln ruined by rain, a batch of cups shattered by careless hands, a harsh word spoken to an apprentice. The more he tried to quiet his thoughts, the faster they spun, like a wheel turned by an unseen force. One night, as a soft fog drifted through the valley and the moon cast a pale glow on the fields, Daichi sat before his wheel, unable to sleep. He placed a lump of clay at the center and began to turn the wheel slowly, his hands moving without plan or intention. The clay responded, rising and falling beneath his touch, sometimes smooth, sometimes collapsing, always alive. As he worked, an old monk entered the workshop, his robes damp with mist, his eyes bright with kindness. Master Hoshin was known for his gentle wisdom and his love of simple things. He watched Daichi for a while, saying nothing, then sat beside him on a low stool. Still awake, Daichi Hoshin asked, his voice soft as the fog outside. Daichi nodded, not looking up from the spinning clay. My mind will not rest. I worry about the pots I have made, the ones I have broken, the ones I have yet to shape. Hoshin smiled, reaching for a small, imperfect bowl on the shelf. Its rim was uneven, its glaze mottled, yet it fit perfectly in his hands. "Tell me, Daichi, do you remember making this bowl?" Daichi glanced at it and nodded. It was a mistake. The clay was too soft, the glaze too thick. I almost threw it away.
"And yet I use it every morning,"
Hoshin said, cradling the bowl. "It holds my tea just as well as any perfect cup. Sometimes its imperfections remind me to be gentle with myself." Daichi listened, feeling the wheel slow beneath his hands. "But I want my work to be flawless, to honor the craft, to leave no mark of my own clumsiness." Hoshin placed the bowl on the table between them. "The fire leaves its mark on every pot. No two are ever the same. The beauty is not in perfection, but in the story. Each vessel tells the story of earth, water, fire, and the hands that shaped it." He gestured to the spinning wheel. "Your mind at night is like this wheel, turning and turning, shaping thoughts from the raw clay of memory and worry. Sometimes the form is beautiful, sometimes it collapses, but always it is alive. If you try to stop the wheel by force, the clay will fly apart. But if you let it turn at its own pace, guiding it gently, you can shape something useful, something true." Daichi watched the clay rise and fall, his hands relaxing, his breath slowing. "But how do I let go of the need for every thought, every vessel to be perfect?" Hoshin smiled, his eyes reflecting the candlelight. "When you fire a pot, you trust the kiln to complete what your hands have begun. You cannot control every crack, every color, every outcome. You do your best, then let go. The same is true for your thoughts. Shape them with care, but release them to the fire of the night. Trust that what remains will be enough." He stood preparing to leave. "When you lie down to sleep, imagine your mind as a wheel turning gently, shaping the clay of your day. Let your thoughts rise and fall, forming and dissolving. Do not cling to what is broken, nor chase after what is not yet made. Rest in the turning and let the fire of sleep complete the work." As the monk disappeared into the mist, Daichi sat quietly, the wheel slowing to a stop. He felt the weight of his worries lighten, each one shaped and set aside, ready for the kiln. That night, as he lay in his small room, he imagined his thoughts as vessels, some perfect, some flawed, all part of the story of his life. Sleep came to him like the hush after the kiln's fire, and in his dreams, Daichi found himself walking through fields of pottery, each piece shining with the gentle light of acceptance, each one whole in its own way. In a village nestled between green hills and winding rivers, there lived a storyteller named Mika, whose tales could quiet a room and whose laughter could warm the coldest evening. By the light of lanterns, children and elders alike gathered to hear her stories of foxes who outwitted the moon, of cranes who brought the rain, of travelers who found wisdom in the most unlikely places. Her words wove magic from the ordinary, turning the troubles of daily life into adventures, the smallest kindness into legend. Yet when the crowds dispersed and the fire burned low, Mika's own mind became a restless narrator, spinning stories she could not silence. She would lie in her quiet room, the echoes of her voice lingering in the rafters, while her thoughts replayed every tale she had told, every word she wished she could take back, every silence she feared had been misunderstood. She worried about stories left unfinished, about promises made in passing, about whether her words truly brought comfort or simply filled the night with noise. Her mind, so skilled at weaving tales for others, became tangled in its own narratives. She imagined futures where her stories were forgotten pasts, where her words had caused harm, and endless versions of the present in which she failed to find the right ending. The harder she tried to quiet her inner storyteller, the more elaborate its tales became, each one more vivid and persistent than the last. One evening, as a gentle rain tapped on her window and the village slept, Mika sat by her writing desk, a blank scroll before her and an ink brush poised in her hand. She hoped that writing would bring her peace, but the words refused to come. The silence felt heavy, filled with all the stories she could not tell. As she sat there, an old friend arrived, a traveling monk named Sora, whose journeys had taken him from snowy mountains to sunlit coasts. He entered quietly, his robes damp from the rain, his eyes bright with the calm of one who has learned to listen to the world's many voices. Still awake, Mikasora asked, settling across from her. She nodded, setting down her brush. My mind won't stop telling stories. Some are full of worry, others of regret. I can't seem to find the ending that brings me peace. Sora smiled, glancing at the empty scroll. Do you remember the story you told last spring about the crane who could not sleep because she was always composing new songs? Mika laughed softly. She tried to sing the perfect lullaby, but every night she found a new verse, and so she never rested. And what did the wise old turtle tell her? Sora prompted. That the song was already complete even with its unfinished lines. That silence too was part of the music, Mika replied, her voice growing gentle. Sora nodded. Your mind is like the crane, always seeking the perfect story, the perfect ending. But sometimes peace is found not in finishing the tale, but in letting it rest for the night. The story will be there in the morning, waiting for you. He poured them both a cup of tea, the steam rising in the candlelight. When you tell stories to others, you leave space for their imagination, for their hearts to fill in the gaps. Do the same for yourself. When thoughts arise at night, worries, regrets, unfinished tales, greet them kindly, then let them settle into silence. Trust that your story does not need to be complete before you rest. Mika sipped her tea, feeling the warmth spread through her. But what if I forget the story or lose the thread while I sleep? Sora smiled, his eyes reflecting the flicker of the flame. The best stories are not remembered word for word, but felt in the heart. Trust that what is true will remain, and what is not needed will drift away like mist at dawn. He rose to leave, pausing at the door. Tonight, let your mind be the quiet room after the last tale is told. Let the stories rest. Let the silence be the ending. In that stillness, you will find the peace you offer to others. When Mika finally lay down, she imagined her mind as a quiet circle of listeners, the fire burning low, the stories settling into gentle silence. She allowed her thoughts to drift and fade, trusting that the tales she needed would return with the morning light. Sleep came to her like the last line of a favorite story, soft and inevitable. And in her dreams, she wandered through a land of endless tales, each one unfolding at its own pace, each one finding its perfect pause in the hush between heartbeats.